My God, the stuff I ran into in Puerto Rico is enough for an entire presentation all of its own. I'd never been there, and I'd heard all these stories about what was happening there. And I thought, I can't believe some of this. And then I went there and found that it was true. For those of you who don't know it, Puerto Rico, for some odd and strange reason, is a focus point at the moment for massive UFO activity. So I'm going to have to go back at the end of the year and do a little more research. Ah, my, how to begin. How many of you in the room tonight heard my brief presentation the other day? How many did not? Okay, for the sake of those of you who were not there the other day, I will review a bit and give you a little bit of background as to who I am, how I got into this crazy business, and what I'm doing in this crazy business. It's important that you understand that most of my adult life I was a professional soldier. I spent 27 years on active duty in the United States Army, and most of those years were in the infantry, special operations, special forces, special assignments here and there. And I state with not necessarily a sense of pride, but I'm very honest about the fact that I was places I should not have been, and I have done things I should not have done in those 27 years. But I served my country to the best of my ability because I believe in it, I believe in the Constitution, and that's one of the reasons I'm going to be speaking out so loudly here this evening on some issues involving that Constitution. Now, I have to also tell you that I've got enough material for 5 hours, so I have to cram it into an hour and a half. So if you'll bear with me, we'll hopefully have some time for a little exchange and a few questions. Before I begin, I'd like to lead off with a couple of quotes that I think are pertinent and appropriate for this subject. And the first quote I want to lay on you is the one from the first act of Hamlet, which most of you I'm sure are familiar with, where the young prince says to his friend, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than your philosophy dreams of." And I want you to keep that in mind as we go into this presentation this evening. There's another quote from a famous English scientist a number of years ago, a chap by the name of Haldane, who said to his peers, he says, "The universe is not only stranger than we know, it is stranger than we can know." And that has always struck me as an appropriate comment and quote for this particular subject. And as I go into this a little further, I think you'll understand what I'm talking about. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my military experience was basically infantry. I spent some time in Korea. I led combat troops in Korea in 1951, long before a lot of you guys were even born. I led combat troops in Vietnam when I was over there. I've been all kinds of places and done all kinds of things, but over the years, I have been very fortunate in getting a few rather choice, what we call plum assignments. And one of those assignments that I was fortunate enough to get occurred in 1963 when I received an assignment to SHAPE headquarters in Paris, France. Now, for those of you who may not be aware of it, SHAPE is an acronym for Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe. And SHAPE was and is the military arm of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So being assigned to Paris in 1963 was a real choice, a real plum, because I had my family with me. My kids were going to school in Paris, which was a real opportunity for a couple of teenagers, and I was happy to be there. I arrived in 1963, and I was immediately assigned to a place they called SHOC, which is another acronym for the Supreme Headquarters Operations Center, which is the war room. And any of you who've ever seen movies about these war rooms, you can get a pretty good idea what it was about. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the war room was staffed with a staff of roughly 25 or 30 people on a normal operational basis. If there was an emergency, they'd cram as many as 150 people into that enormous room, and all hell would break loose. It would look sometimes like the pictures you see of the New York Stock Exchange where everybody's screaming and yelling and running around and bumping into each other and bells are ringing and all of that. That's really a pretty good idea of what the shape war room would look like when the balloon would go up. Well, when I got there in 1963, I learned of a study that had been initiated in shape in 1961. Now, they were talking about it, and this was even before it had been published. They were talking about it, and they were talking about what had led to the establishment of this study. Now, I must tell you that during the 50s and early 60s, events were occurring in Europe. Well, you know that we and the Soviets in the Warsaw Pact were staring at each other across the divided Iron Curtain. We were armed to the teeth. I mean, literally. We had weapons. My God, we could have caused Armageddon. We could have brought about World War III at any moment. We're looking at each other across this Iron Curtain. All of us had our fingers on the triggers. Some of us had our fingers on the red buttons. And it was a very tense and difficult time. Well, somebody was throwing a few rags into the mess here. Somebody was throwing another factor into this mess. Not that it wasn't bad enough, but there were some interesting, large, circular, metallic objects that were flying over Central Europe, coming out of the Soviet zone over the Warsaw Pact area. They would fly over Europe, Germany, France. They would generally go over to the southern coast of England, turn north, and head up the channel, and then they would disappear off of NATO radar, usually over the Norwegian Sea, up close to the Arctic Circle. Now, these objects were very large, and they were very fast, and they were flying in formation, and they were very clearly under intelligent control. They would travel at speeds anywhere from 1,500 to 5,000 miles an hour. And they could stop on a dime. They could change directions instantaneously. And for a long time, the Soviets thought they were ours. And for a short time, we really honestly believed that they belonged to the Soviets. And these things demonstrated some technology that was so incredible that if we or the Soviets, either one, had had them, the Cold War would have been over just like that. But what I'm trying to point out is that these things intruding into European airspace over an armed camp, literally, where we're all out there ready to start shooting at each other, would generate the heat a little bit, and everybody would go on alert, and my God, all hell would break loose. And this had happened a number of times. Fortunately, we and the Soviets and the Warsaw Pact people had refrained from shooting at each other over this. We refrained from launching missiles over this. But an event occurred in February of 1961. It was the straw that literally broke the air marshal's back, if you'll pardon that phrasing. My boss at SHAPE was an American four-star general by the name of Lyman Lemnitzer. He was known as SACEUR, the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. And it was a great honor for me to be assigned to work on his staff. His deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe was a British Air Marshal by the name of Sir Thomas Pike, who was one of the most highly decorated heroes in the Royal Air Force in World War II. And Pike finally had had enough of this crap, if you'll pardon some of my infantry vernacular here, about these objects. And they held a big meeting here after the February incident in General Lemnitzer's office, and they said, we're going to have to get to the bottom of this. What the hell is going on? What are they? Who are they? Why are they here? Where are they from? And just what in the world is happening here? We can't let this go on and on and on. Now, Pike had repeatedly tried to get information from London and Washington on these objects. He could get nothing out of either Washington or London on these large metallic circular objects that were flying at will all over Europe. The reason they wouldn't send anything to him or to any of us at SHAPE in Paris at that time was that there was an enormous French spy ring in place that was very effective. And some of the top people in France were involved in this. We have a pause. Where was I? Oh, the spy ring. Many of you who read a lot will know that Leon Uris wrote a book a number of years ago called Topaz. And in that book, which was eventually made into an excellent movie, Leon Uris did a novel, a real dynamite bang-up book on this French spy ring. And it existed during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And what was happening is that there were a lot of French ministers, for a variety of reasons, who were either selling stuff to the Soviets for money, or many of them were doing it because of their political alignments. We were learning that stuff that would come out of Washington and London would sometimes get to Moscow before it would get to us. And we were the addressees. That's how effective this thing was. Now, if you can ever read the book by Leon Uris, or even see the movie, and I think you can probably rent it out of the film, the videos, it tells a pretty good story, but that's the reason that General Pike, Air Marshal Pike, was not getting any information on this particular extremely sensitive subject, because we knew that if they'd sent it, it would have gone to Moscow, and generally they'd have it before we did. So SHAPE decided, Air Marshal Pike, General Lemnitzer, and the top senior military staff decided to establish their own in-house study on this particular phenomenon to try to get a handle on what was going on. Now bear in mind that this is 1961. Sometime after Roswell, sometime after UFOs had been doing everything but landing on the White House lawn in the United States, they were finally deciding over there to really take a good look and see what was happening. To be brief, and I'm going to try to be brief because I'm a long-winded type and I go on and on about this. The study took 3 years. It literally was one of the most thorough and complete analysis I have ever seen. When it was published in '64, the study itself was approximately 1.5 inches thick. It was supported by almost 8 inches of annexes and appendices. And there were annexes on meteorological studies, annexes on, biological studies. There were annexes on a variety of every one of the hard sciences that you can imagine. But the study in '64, when it was published with a cosmic top secret clearance level, which at that time, and I'm told still is, the highest security level that exists in SHAPE headquarters. Now in those days, the United States did not have a cosmic level clearance, but I'm told that they now have, our guys in Washington have introduced and adopted the cosmic level clearance. But at that time, in those years, it was only NATO, it was only SHAPE. Well, the interesting thing to me as a young professional soldier who was working in the war room, when I got my hands on this thing and read it and realized what it meant, it literally changed my life. And I'll share a few things with you which I think you'll understand very clearly why. For all those years, I had been a curious skeptic about the UFO matter. I'd been reading about it, I'd been hearing reports, I'd even seen photographs, and I was curious. But not until 1964, when I read the completed study, which was titled An Assessment, with a subtitle of an evaluation of a possible military threat to Allied forces in Europe. Not until 1964 did I really believe and understand that this particular issue was not only real, that it was absolutely mind-boggling in its implications for the human race and the planet Earth. And my young, crew-cut military mind has never been the same. I read it, I put it back in a vault, I'd pull it out when I was on those 12-hour shifts where you're in there, you think it's going to last forever. 3 in the morning when you're dead tired, you're bored, and I'd pull it out of the vault again and go through it. I looked at the photographs, I studied the analyses, I studied the conclusions, and it literally turned my whole life around. And from that point on, I've never been the same. And I'll be the first to admit it, and you might want to call it an obsession or a compulsion. It doesn't much matter to me what you wish to call it. But when I realized that this was real, that it was not fantasy, it was not science fiction, it was incredibly real, the implications dawned on me as to what this phenomenon meant to the human race and to the planet Earth. And it launched me on a 30-year study and synthesis in my own life, in my own private life, in the remaining years in the military until I retired in 1976, until today. I'm still up to here with it, and I must honestly tell you that in my opinion, this is not only probably the most single important issue of our time, but I'm convinced that it is probably the single most important issue in the history of the human race. And I'll try as best I can to explain to you why I believe that to be true. The SHAPE military study, the assessment, was relatively brief in the sense that they didn't go into a lot of theory and evaluation and possibilities. They simply approached the thing as they had initially intended to approach it. Is there a military threat to Allied forces in Europe from these things? Well, before it was over in '64, when they completed it, published it in 3 languages and only 15 copies, they concluded, and follow me closely on this, they concluded that the human race and the planet Earth have apparently been under a detailed, long-range analysis, survey, or study of some kind by several, plural, several high-technology extraterrestrial intelligences. Now that's a zinger in itself. The second conclusion was that this survey or study or whatever you wish to call it has apparently been going on for a very long time, if not hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. They also concluded that there appeared to be, and this was the result of a very detailed analysis, some kind of a developing ongoing program of some kind. A process was taking place. They could see it in the 3 years they studied it, and then they went back and got all of the historical records, and it became apparent to those guys that something was underway that was planned, that was intelligent, that was developing, evolving, a process of some kind. Now, they never in '64 would even presume to try to determine what it was. But they concluded that something was underway. They also concluded that apparently there was no major military threat involved. Because if there were, the technology that they had demonstrated was so far beyond anything we had that if they had been malevolent or hostile, it would have been over a long time ago. That if they really wanted to turn us into dog food, come down and grab our real estate or whatever, they could have done it a long time before. So apparently that's not what they had in mind. Apparently that's not what their program was all about. Because if they'd wanted that, they would have done it. Now you understand that this study, this analysis, and these conclusions are based in some point upon our own psychological profile. What would we be doing if we were an advanced technology? Well, I can tell you very flatly, we'd probably be interested in taking the real estate. And we would be interested in conquering those people and taking over and establishing our own system. You know, we've done it before. Look at the history of the human race, for God's sake. Look what we did just 200 years ago here in the New World. Look what the Spaniards did in Mexico. Look what many of my own English ancestors did in the New World. So, that was their big fear, that these guys, with all that technology, were going to come in and take over, run the show. Well, apparently that's not what they had in mind. Thank God. Now, the final conclusion which, let's see, based upon the fact that they were here, they'd been here for a long time, they apparently were not a threat. The final conclusion that the shape study stated at the end of the thing is that they were going to continue to monitor this phenomenon continually. They were going to keep it highly classified because the conclusions they had reached in that there were several extraterrestrial, probably alien advanced technologies involved, was that the average person was in no way prepared to handle this kind of reality. So they kept it cosmic top secret. To this day, you can't even talk about it in SHAPE headquarters or you'll end up in jail. I visited SHAPE a couple of years ago, and I tried to do a little nosing around to see whether the thing still existed, whether it was still in the files, whether it was still classified, and I damn near didn't get out of the headquarters there. And now, I have to tell you that they published this in 15 copies in 3 languages, French, German, and English. In 1967, when I was still there, General de Gaulle decided that he was going to withdraw France from the military arm. He was going to withdraw France from SHAPE, which he did. For those of you who are old enough to remember, Charles de Gaulle pulled France out. He wanted to develop his own nuclear response capability. And so in 1967, SHAPE headquarters had to pack up and move out of France from Paris up to Brussels, where it's now located today. So when I visited there 2 years ago, the new location is just outside of Brussels. It is still the supreme headquarters of Allied powers. Still pretty much the same kind of headquarters I was involved with before. I had helped close it down and move it in 1967, just before I came home. But this damn study is still there, and it's still locked up tight. And you just don't even want to talk about it because people will start looking around, and the next thing you know, they won't even talk to you. And I wanted to visit socially and spend some time with some old cronies and such. Now, where am I here at this point? That study in 1964 launched me on this extensive survey research program of my own. It became very apparent to me from the very beginning that there was no simple way to address this phenomenon. And this is one of the points that I want to make and make as clear as I can. In this country, in this world, you will notice, and you have already noticed, that most hard scientific disciplines are extremely focused on their own narrow area of research. You will have scientists who are Nobel Prize winners working on something here, and their blinders are on, and they're focused on this, and they're brilliant men. But they have no idea what's going on over here, or over there, or around there. They haven't a clue as to what's really going on. Now, this phenomenon is so complicated and so vast, there is not one single discipline in existence on this planet that you can really address and come up with an answer as to what in the hell is happening. And I'm not a great scholar, and I don't have all these degrees, but it became apparent to me, as a trained intelligence analyst, that if I was going to get a handle on what was really taking place, I couldn't just look at it this way, or that way, or this way. I had to look at it from all of those views. So I launched myself on a 30-year synthesis. I studied history. That had been my major in college, by the way, ancient history. I studied philosophy. I studied literature. I studied mythology, anthropology, geology, theology, a number of the hard sciences, chemistry and physics, and I even studied some art and music, because as I began to dig into this thing, I found that every one of those disciplines had something to say about this issue. And my question was this. As I began, I wanted to know what in the hell is really happening here. I had long ago concluded that there was hardware, and there was high-tech hardware, and it was pretty impressive and pretty incredible. And I had also concluded that there were little guys inside that hardware. Not only little guys, but there were some big guys, and there were even bigger guys, which is another story in itself. For those of you who studied the phenomenon, you know what I'm talking about. But I finally decided that if I were going to get a handle on this thing, I was going to have to look at the whole thing. My initial impetus was this: who are they? Where are they from? Why are they here? And what do they want? Well, that's a good place to begin, I guess, but do you know where I ended up? After 30 years of research and synthesis, I really ended up learning more about who we are, why we're here, and where we're going. Because the more I got into this thing, the more it became apparent to me that this was not singly an issue of extraterrestrial visitation. It was much more vast than that, and it literally indeed involved the entire human race and the entire history of the planet. Now, I'll have to tell you a little bit about what I really concluded. Excuse me. When I left the service in 1976 and lost my top clearance, our military and our top civilian leadership knew in 1976 that there were at least 4 high-tech extraterrestrial intelligences coming here. At least 4. And the thing that was the most interesting to me and upset the generals and admirals in shape more than anything else was one of those groups looked exactly like we do. And I don't mean similar, I mean exactly. One of those 4 visiting high-tech extraterrestrial intelligences looked exactly like we do. So much so that they could sit next to you in a restaurant, sit beside you in an airplane, and you'd never know. And if you think that didn't affect the paranoid generals and admirals, because we were all paranoid in the military. We were trained to be so. It was the nature of our game. To be suspicious, to look at who's the next enemy and where and all that good stuff. So I'm not putting my fellow military guys down. But we were basically paranoid. The idea that there could be an intelligent, advanced, high-tech extraterrestrial intelligence walking up and down the corridors of SHAPE headquarters, that bothered them. Then somebody said, my God, do you realize that they could even be walking up and down the corridors of the Pentagon? Well, that bothered them. And one lieutenant colonel one afternoon during a discussion says, do you realize that they could even be in the White House? And that was kind of a form of black humor that was not too well received. I have personally always wondered about where we got some of those guys we put into the White House. I'm sure many of you do too. But anyhow, that kind of bothered these guys. It bothered them more about the aliens who looked exactly like us than it did about the others. The little grays, the big tall dudes with no hair that were 8 feet tall, and the reptilian kind, which we had seen repeatedly. And they had been seen over the years. So anyhow, over the years, it became apparent to me that we're dealing with something far, far greater than any of us could imagine. And then let me tell you what I have begun to conclude, which has really changed my life. After 30 years of research, it became quite clear to me that not only are we not alone, we have never been alone. That we are apparently members of an infinite, a vast and infinite community of life out there. And we're simply a bunch of guys living in the suburbs or in the sticks. That universe is literally teeming and packed with intelligent life and high technology, and we're just now becoming aware of it. Now, what else did I conclude? And I'm going to have to move along here because I do want to show those slides. It became apparent to me a number of years ago, long before I ever had the opportunity to read Zecharia Sitchin's work. And for those of you who have read Zecharia, let me tell you, his work is a masterpiece. If you haven't read any of Zecharia Sitchin's Earth Chronicles, and I think there are 5 of them out now, by all means get a hold of them and read them, because it's some of the best scholarship I have ever seen. The reason I like it is that he agrees with me. Really, because I agree with Zecharia. He's an old Hebrew scholar. He's a couple of years older than I am, several. And I take my hat off to him because he has concluded the same thing I have concluded. And this is one of the reasons I believe that our military and our government authorities are still keeping the lid on this. And they don't yet know how to let this information out. They want to. They really do want to let some of it out and share it with you, but they don't know how. They've lied to you for so long, and many of you know this. Lying has become institutionalized in government. Now, how many of you are shocked to know that your government doesn't always level with you? I'm sorry to have to tell you that, but during the Cold War years, we literally did institutionalize lying. And I was a part of it for most of my years in the service. So I know what the hell I'm talking about. But let's get back to my conclusions so we can get into this slideshow. My own research and studies have convinced me, and I think the evidence is there, and I would encourage each and every one of you to study it yourselves. Don't for a moment believe a word I say up here tonight just because I'm saying it. I'm not a prophet, I'm not proselytizing, and I'm not on a crusade. But I am trying to share with you some information about what I consider to be the most important issue of our time. And you've got to do your own research. You've got to do your own reading and reach your own conclusions. And I'm convinced that if you do that, you're going to end up in the same place I am and a lot of others who are here speaking to you this weekend. So what did I finally come to? And boy, this is a real trick here. This is a real shaker. I am convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I believe the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. All you have to do is look at it. And that is that the human race, all of us, all the different colors, all of the different languages, all of the different religions, every one of us on this planet are a hybrid species, and we have been seeded here, and we have been genetically manipulated on this planet for hundreds of thousands of years from the very beginning of human history. And we have had an ongoing, intimate, and I say that again, intimate interrelationship with high-tech extraterrestrial intelligence. And it's still going on. It's not something that stopped 1,000 years ago. Didn't stop 2,000 years ago. It's going on even as we sit here speaking with each other. Partly that this abduction scenario you keep hearing about is part of it. It has been with us from the beginning of our time. We have had indeed an intimate interrelationship with advanced intelligence out there. And what we are, who we are, we owe to their involvement. Now, Fred Hoyle calls it meddling. Well, I guess that's one term you could apply to it, that maybe they are meddling in our affairs. But if you really look at the thing and really understand, as a species, not only have we been genetically manipulated, but we were probably initially created by those guys. Now, that is hairy stuff. That's heavy. And how do you share that with fundamentalist members of any church on this planet? And I'm not talking about Christian fundamentalists alone. I'm talking about Muslim fundamentalists, Hindus, Buddhists, doesn't matter. To share this kind of information is dangerous. A few short years ago, I would have gotten burned at the stake in a minute for opening my big fat mouth. And you guys would be in big trouble for having sat here and listened to me. So we're dealing with some pretty heavy stuff, some very sensitive material. How do you tell people, first of all, that they have been lied to for so long on so many subjects by so many different people? How do you tell them that they are going to have to address and face this reality, not only now, but yesterday, that they're going to have to face it, they're going to have to address it, they're going to have to accept what it means, they're going to have to start paying attention, getting off their dead you-know-whats, put the chips away, take the six-pack back to the fridge, turn off the Saturday afternoon game, and start paying attention, damn it, because you are involved and the future of your species is involved. That's why it's important for you to start paying attention and doing your own research. Now, I have to divulge briefly here and state that your government has not been overly cooperative with you in getting this information out. First of all, during the Cold War years, we allowed our intelligence agencies to literally create in our government a secret government. During the Cold War years, and a lot of you know that out there, and I know that some of you have really done some digging into that subject, our intelligence operations, which were initiated and originally for the very best reasons, have in a sense over the years become a government within a government. And let me try to explain why I believe that to be so. This issue of the UFO matter in itself is a prime example. What you have in Washington and other parts of the country is you have people making national policy that were never elected, who are not responsible and are not accountable to either the legislative or the executive branch of government, and they're making national policy on this particular subject as well as a number of others that's affecting your lives, the lives of your children, the lives of your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and affecting the lives of every human being on this planet. And I say again and again and again till I'm blue in the face, you not only have a right to know this information, you have a need to know. Because, damn it, you're paying $50 billion a year in black budget programs, where about 3/4 of those black budget programs are involved in this alien UFO matter. Now, we have literally allowed that to happen because we have complacently sat back and allowed it to happen. How many of you, well, I don't want to get personal here, but you know how many don't ever bother to go to the polls and vote? A hell of a lot of people don't even register, for God's sake. Now, the only way this constitutional system of government will ever survive is if the people themselves participate in it actively. And that means not only register, but vote and raise hell. Now, this issue particularly, in my view, is probably the most key issue. But there are hundreds of others. I mean, I could get into this, spend hours if I could talk that long, about what happened with Jack Kennedy in 1963. We could talk about what happened to Bobby. We could talk about the fact that they bumped off a pope, and the evidence is there. I mean, my God, this has been going on for years, and the average American sits back and placidly accepts the silly-ass excuses of what the experts tell them. Like, have you ever looked at the horrendous, absurd situation of the single bullet thing in Dallas? My God. Have any of you ever investigated or at least read what happened to Bobby in that hotel in L.A. here? Have you ever heard how many shots were fired? And did you ever know that the bullet that killed him came from the back? And when it was taken out of his skull, it was not fired from Sirhan's gun. Now, these are little tiny things. I simply throw them out to give you an example of the kind of crap that you've been swallowing for far too long. And my anger is simply this. I'm getting to a point where I'm too old to worry about it. I have been subtly intimidated on this particular issue. My phone is tapped. I've had phone calls. I've had black helicopters flying over my house. A number of things have occurred. Cecilia mentions the fact we had a bullet through our storage room. So on. These little minor things. The point being, I am rattling a cage or two, and I'm doing it purposely. I'm violating my security oath on purpose. I challenge them to come after me. I want them to take my butt off to court, because then, if we can get a hearing, I can subpoena witnesses and I can subpoena evidence. And if they want to charge me, I'm willing to go through that. I don't think they're going to do that. First of all, I made a big noise. I've come out. People now know who I am. I'm becoming infamous, I think, more than famous. The point is that I'm trying desperately in the few remaining years of my life to get a few of you people and my good friends to stop letting them pull the wool over your eyes. And that's the nicest way I can say it. I'm tempted to use some old infantry terms. But you've got to stop that, letting that happen. You've got to start paying attention. And in about hundreds, probably, maybe thousands of retired and active duty military guys are willing now to come out of the closet and speak openly and share what they know about this subject, and to take it out of the hands of the guys that are in charge of it and put it in the hands of the American people again, where it belongs and where it should have been in the first place 50 years ago. Now, I can't fault Harry Truman. Bless his heart, he's gone to his reward. But when this thing really became apparent to them, when he was in the White House, when it became overwhelmingly apparent that they were dealing with extraterrestrial intelligence, high technology, they panicked and they put the whole damn thing in the hands of the military, which was the first big mistake. And speaking from 27 years of my own experience, it was a mistake. It should never have been in military hands. It should have been in the hands of our Congress, our scientific researchers. It should have been in the hands of academics. It should have been in the hands of the State Department. When that reality became apparent back in those early years, the military was the last place it should have been because of the paranoia and because of the ongoing and continuing cover-up. How many of you are aware that lives have been lost over the years by people who wanted to speak out on this subject? Good. Not only Morris Jessup, but hundreds of decent, good people have died because of their interest in this subject and their intense desire to share it with the American people. I was a member for a number of years of an organization in Tucson called APRO. I was a good friend of Carl and Jim Lorenzen, and I sat on their board of directors for 12 years. Jim died from a massive cancer of the brain. Fast acting. When it was first detected, in a few months, Jim was gone. I don't know how many of you know that the famous Mr. Casey of the CIA died the same way. I don't know how many of you know that Alan Hynek died of fast-acting brain cancer. I don't know how many of you know that Deke Slayton, one of our great astronauts who just died a few months back, who wanted to come out and talk about this and lay it out, died from fast-acting brain cancer. So they're not as basic as they were during the years when they took out Bobby Kennedy, and they took out Jack, they took out the Pope. My God, I could spend hours on this particular subject with you. They're a little more subtle now. I believe that the only reason I'm getting away with talking to you and sharing with you and telling you what little I know, what little I have learned, what little I have believed or learned to be the truth, is because I think at some level in government back there, God knows where, not that someone loves me, but that someone is pleased that whatever it is I'm doing, they want done. And that's the only reason that I am getting away with this, because I could have been taken out of this thing anytime, any place, just like that. We all know, if we've ever studied the state of the art, that a number of years ago we learned from our buddies in the KGB that they have a little pin apparatus that holds gas. And if you were to pass somebody on a stairway and squirt it in their face and then go on, that person will fall dead. And if they take him off to the clinic, all they can ever determine is that he had a coronary, massive heart attack. Nothing in the system would ever indicate otherwise. So what I'm trying to say is if somebody wanted me to shut up, they could shut me up. But I believe at some level that they want me to continue to do what I'm doing, because I am very, very grateful and am most gratified by the fact that when I share what little I know with people, they seem to respond appropriately. They seem to be appreciative, they seem to be thankful, and it seems in many ways to confirm what they already know. So I'm an old codger, and I'm going to keep it up as long as I can, because I believe in it. And I believe in my government, and I believe in my Constitution. And I have babbled quite a bit now, and my wife's pointing to her watch as usual. So I'm going to shift gears here just a little bit, and I got some slides I want to show you. Initially, as I said, this intimate interrelationship has gone on for thousands of years, and the evidence is overwhelming. In the studies of history alone, it's there. All you have to do is look for it. And I have a few examples which I'll share with you this afternoon before we close this thing out. Now I start off this little brief slideshow with a series of pictures like this, and I do it for a particular purpose, because I believe that it sets it sets the stage. It gives you a little perspective, and I love these photographs. They're beautiful, literally. And in showing them to you, I'll have to point out that about 17 years ago, NASA, in its infinite wisdom, got a bunch of astronomers together in the NASA headquarters, and they spent a few weeks doing some surveys. They asked these astronomers to give them a good working estimate of how many stars are there out there. And as a result of about 3 or 4 weeks of work, they concluded, roughly, that there were roughly 400 billion stars in our galaxy alone. Now, I like to point out at this point that no one can really deal with figures of that size except the guys who deal with our national debt and the people who deal with our budget. But 400 billion stars, roughly, in our galaxy alone. I find these so beautiful because, in my sense, that's looking home. That's looking back where we came from. We are, as you all know, I'm sure, we are star stuff. We are made from those stars. I want you to look at that. Now, I'm old enough to remember when they put the great 200-inch lens on Mount Palomar a number of years ago. Now, those of you guys who are young, too young to know that, back before they put the big 200-inch lens on Mount Palomar, they'd look out through their telescopes and see all of those and conclude that those were stars. Then, when Palomar was operational and they looked out there again, they found that a big chunk of those were not stars. They were other galaxies. Galaxies, mind you, not just stars. 400 billion stars in our own galaxy. Now, I throw this out because that is the great galaxy in Andromeda, the one that's in the catalogs listed as M31. The reason I like to show it is that it's shaped very much like our own. I'm always doing this. Oh, well, here it is. If we were out there somewhere, really way out there, and we were looking at our own galaxy, our solar system and the planet Earth would be located roughly about here. So we are really in the sticks. We're out in the country, so to speak, in our own galaxy. But when they concluded that there were 400 billion stars, give or take a few million, in our own galaxy, they concluded in addition that there were roughly 400 billion galaxies in the known universe. And ladies and gentlemen, there are still scientific idiots who still believe that we're all there is. There are people who honestly believe that this little race on this little tiny planet going around the edge of its own little solar system and the edge of its own galaxy is all there is. And I like to set that stage because I'm convinced that we are indeed members of a vast and probably infinite community of life. And I think it's important that we understand that because I'm convinced that that understanding in itself will bring about an expansion of consciousness in each and every one of us that could be the salvation of this race. We have got to expand our awareness and our consciousness, and that's a good way to do it, I think. But I love that. Those are beautiful. To me, that's home. There's the Pleiades. Many of you are familiar with that. The Seven Sisters. Our ancient ancestors were aware of them, and some of our ancient visitors. The great Greek and Roman gods, the great Sumerian gods, many of them supposedly came from the Pleiades. Now, bless its heart, there's our little home. And I look at that with a sense of poignancy and sometimes a sense of overwhelming sadness because I chatted with a few of the astronauts who've been out there, and there's not a one of them who've been there who says you can't look back at the planet from either the moon or just in space without feeling an overwhelming sense of love for our little home. And when you stop to realize how we're trashing it and how we're screwing it up so terribly, I think that growth and expansion and consciousness is important for us to stop treating her so badly. Because right at the moment, she's all we've got. Not one of the guys who ever went out there and looked back was ever the same. And they all said the same thing. That when you see it, you see home from out there somewhere, it looks so tiny, and you feel an overwhelming sense of love and affection. I'd like for the entire human race to develop that. Now, I mentioned history, and I'm fascinated by it because in my research I found out that over the centuries, extraterrestrial involvement in our lives has been manifested or demonstrated in a number of different ways. Now, this is a Renaissance painting. And the reason I throw this up is because it's got some interesting cloud formations. And I only bring them to your attention because I'm going to get into a little bit more on clouds. But notice what interesting shapes those clouds are. Disc-shaped with domes on top. Now, is that just a coincidence? And is it a coincidence that those clouds are demonstrated in a religious painting involving this event? The carpenter from Galilee and the cross? Another religious painting. Notice the lenticular clouds. Now, a lot of scientists will say, well, those are simply lenticular clouds. Well, possibly. But they're always so unique, disc-shaped with a dome on top. And here they are again in the sky on a religious painting at an incident involving the carpenter from Galilee. Now, is that a coincidence? I don't think so. And I'll explain to you why I'm convinced it's not. Now, here we have a lenticular cloud. This was photographed in the Soviet Union a few years ago. What was interesting about it is it didn't dissipate, and when it sat there for about an hour, it finally moved away at a rather high rate of speed in its entire shape. And lenticular clouds do not normally do that. Another photograph from the Soviet Union, not the same object, but another object, was observed to depart rather quickly and without changing its shape, without dissipating. Now, the reason I call your attention to clouds is a series of photos that were taken at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, a number of years ago by a young soldier who was going through some training there. This is the famous Fort Belvoir sequence of pictures. While the guys were out there on the ground, they all looked up and noticed over this one building the strangest object in the sky. And one of the young sergeants had a camera and he snapped a shot. And then it got closer and he snapped another shot. And they're all beginning to talk to each other. What in the hell is that? And then the object began to change. Right in front of their eyes. There must have been 40 guys out there. Now, what is this object becoming? It appears to me to be turning itself into a lenticular cloud, which I believe we should pay a lot more attention to. I'm not saying that all lenticular clouds may not be clouds. I'm simply saying some may not be clouds. And the next time you see one, look it over. Look at that. Now, they got this whole sequence on film, and these are all legitimate photographs. And there you are, and it finally departed at a relatively high rate of speed, and it did not dissipate. It just went, and it was gone. So I just say that, I throw that out and tell you the next time you look at a lenticular cloud, look at it carefully. You might be surprised. Another lenticular cloud, 7,000 miles away and 15 years later in Denmark. Notice the rim. And this lenticular cloud also departed at a relatively swift rate of speed. So as Hamlet says to his friend Horatio, there is more indeed in heaven and earth than our philosophies dream of. Now here's a fast-moving lenticular cloud photographed in New Mexico. It was moving smartly from right to left, and it's leaving a bit of a trail here behind it. Another lenticular cloud. I think this was photographed in Japan a number of years ago. Again, it's moving swiftly from right to left. You notice that you can almost see a rim up in here. Well, in these lenticular clouds, I'm convinced there are guys sitting up there looking down at us. Now, this is an interesting little artifact. It's what old Ivan Sanderson used to call years ago, a favorite term that he coined called uparts. And uparts means out-of-place artifacts. And this little clay figure was estimated to be at least 1,000 years old, and it was found in the jungles of, I believe, Bolivia. And this was made by an Indian 1,000 years ago. And I want you just to take a little glance at this thing. Look at the suit, the headpiece, the faceplate. To me, that looks like an astronaut in a spacesuit. Another figure. Another Indian made this one. Look at that. Faceplate. Probably oxygen or whatever. Whatever he was breathing. But the Indian was doing his best to express something he had seen and didn't quite know how to do it. And frankly, I think he did a great job. Now, this is a quick shot of a number of standard UFO shapes that have appeared over the years that have been cataloged and kept in books. And there's one I want you just to kind of take a peek at, and that's this one here. You've got all of the standard other shapes, the discs, the ice cream cones, all of the rest of them. But I want you just to look at this one and keep that in mind briefly. These are cave paintings. Many of these are from the mountains north in Spain and in southern France, and they're Paleolithic and some are Neolithic, but the oldest are considered to be roughly 40,000 years old. Now, some of our ancestors, apparently, some years ago, were scratching and painting on the walls of the caves they lived in, things that they would see every day. Now, we know what they were seeing. They were looking at deer, they were looking at buffalo, they were looking at the old ancient Siberian horse, they were looking at wild boar, they were looking at mammoths or mastodons. These were items that were in their daily lives, that they hunted, killed, and lived on. I want you to look at some of these things here. And that one there. And this one. And this one. And these two. And then these two dudes moving along there. And what was the artist trying to convey? That those objects were apparently moving at a pretty high rate of speed. Now this, my friends, goes back 40,000 years. Admiration for them. This is a page from a book that has been put together by a French scientist where he's tried to categorize these objects that he's collected over the years. Look at that one. Look at this one here. This one. And look at all these different shapes. He's got them all based upon their overall shape. This is the one we saw on that painting. Now, I'm convinced that the artist is conveying that something in the sky and that shape was moving. And it was the only way he knew how to convey it. Look at this one. And this one. Now, our ancestors weren't stupid. They may not have been modern, they may not have been terribly bright, but they weren't stupid. Look here. This is obviously one sitting on the ground with its legs down. These guys were literally portraying what they saw. Now, this is from a panel on an Egyptian tomb, a sarcophagus that goes back to at least the 2nd dynasty. And on this sarcophagus is an interesting object that's painted here. Now, that was shown to be, with hieroglyphs, that was called the chest of Osiris, or the ship of Osiris. And I looked at that thing and I had to turn it upside down. And now, I don't know whether it's just my imagination or not, but I'm convinced that that artist in Egypt, 2,000 years before Christ was born, when he painted what he called the ship or chest of Osiris, was painting a kind of a little runabout that one of our visitors, one of our creator gods, as we know from the study of Egyptology, so Osiris was one of the great creator gods in the ancient Egyptian myth and legend. And look back here. If that is not representing a jet exhaust of some kind, and a little cabin. I can see Osiris sitting inside of that thing, tooling all over the place.
Why did he not paint it right side up then?
Well, what I did is, when the first time I saw it in the book, I saw it upside down, and that intrigued me.
Yeah, but if that's what the artist was painting, why didn't he paint it right
Well,
side
you
up?
see, I don't really know that this panel is not from a complete sarcophagus. So I'm not certain. Now, either the ship was upside down or the bird was upside down. But either way, I had to turn it over just to look at it in a sense that made sense to me. So I must be honest with you that that's what made sense to me. I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
Quiver with arrows and stuff. Well, they have been seen to fly almost upside down anyway.
Yes, oh, they do, yeah. Well, apparently upside down doesn't mean anything to those guys.
Right side up.
Well, when they're in there, and they're inside that field that they create, there probably isn't such a thing as upside, right side, or anything. They're in their own field, which is why they can make right-angle turns at 4,000 miles an hour and not be splashed on the side of the ship. This is another little clue. This was found by some Soviet archaeologists near Fergana in the Russian-Chinese border region a number of years ago. And when they first saw it, they chuckled and said, that's got to be a hoax. And then they did some more research, and they determined that, no, that probably wasn't a hoax. They did some dating. How they dated it, I'm not sure, but they determined that was well over 1,500 years ago when that painting was made. And I just wanted to call it to your attention because this object in the hands here of this individual with gloves, look like gauntlets that our astronauts wear, looks like a faceplate of some kind, a plastic or glass dome, looks like some apparatus here of some kind, maybe a breathing apparatus. But if that's not enough, over here in this little dude with the antenna on his head. And then look up here. And they estimated this was roughly 1,500 years on the Russian-Chinese border near Fergana. Now, this again is another little piece of information. Any way I can be focused or made a little bit sharper. It's not really a good picture, but anyhow, this is a painting that was done in 1710 called The Baptism of Christ. And it was done by a Flemish artist, and this thing was done 1710, The Baptism of Christ. Now, what attracted my attention is this circular object up here with the rays coming down and that little dot in the middle. So I went through my collection and I spent some time, and what did I come up with? An almost identical shape with a light or something in the middle. Now, there are no rays coming down from that one, but I've got a few other shots that show rays coming down from them. But again, this was a painting in 1710, a religious scene. What was the artist trying to convey? Well, I'll tell you what my conclusions are as we get along a little farther here. This is a strange plate called the Loladov plate, based upon the findings of a Soviet archaeologist who found this in the mountains of Nepal. No one to this day knows what it's made out of. They think it's a kind of a metal and perhaps some ceramic. But the owner refuses to let them cut into it and take a sample because it would probably destroy it. But it rings like metal, but it has a consistency of ceramics. But I call it to your attention because this thing was estimated to be several thousand years old. And look at this little dude here. And what do you suppose this means here? A sun, there's a big lizard. Here's a creature here with a long tail. This looks like octopus of some kind. I mean, and there's some writing here. Look at this. There's a sun. This little dude, I think, represents one of the little grays. They've never deciphered this writing. They're working on it. This looks like a regular UFO to me. Now that plate conveys a message, and yet we're still not sure what it means. This what? Was discovered in this century by a Russian archaeologist in Nepal. a chap by the name of Lolodov. Yes, Lolodov, and this is known as the famous Lolodov plate, and it has become an enigma, and it's what Ivan Sanderson would call an UPART.
I wonder if you're looking at a timeline there where there was some kind of a intelligent animal that
You know, that's a
involved
good
in our
point.
system, and then the intervention of the aliens at a time when, say, those look like almost brittle star primitive life forms in the ocean.
Yeah.
They could have done some genetic research at that time.
This could have been a message of some kind. And maybe it was meant to be deciphered by an intelligent species much, much later. Well, I'm not sure when that intelligent species is going to come along. But I call this to the attention of some of the people who are always joking and laughing about this subject.
What is that called again?
The Lolodov plate.
Where is it now?
It's in a museum. I think it's in the Berlin Museum.
You say that testing has been resisted for fear of...
Well, the owner, I guess the Berlin Museum, refuses to let it be chopped up or drilled into or cut to determine what it is really made of. But just from examining it, tapping it, putting it under light, they think it's a combination of ceramic and metal. But it's another one of those little UPARTs. Now this is from Zechariah Sitchin's work, from his book, The Stairway to Heaven, and I borrowed that because it is a runabout. It is the ship that the ancient gods, Enki and Enlil, used to get around in. Now, to me, these are headlights, and this is representing probably light beams. This is probably the little cabin. Here are some fins, here's the tail, and here's the jet. And I can imagine some of the ancient Anunnaki gods getting around in something like that. This is another enigma. This was found by Erich von Daniken, and this is in German, and I apologize, it's not that good a picture. But this was found in Egypt just a few years ago, and they've dated this back to probably the first or second dynasty. And the German archaeologists who looked at it said, my God, look at that. Mein Gott. This, they thought, looked like a helicopter. This, they thought, looked like a tank. This little object here, they thought looked like a submarine. Now, this is one of the more ancient Egyptian cities, going back to the beginning of recorded history. I simply throw it out as an enigma that's worth looking at and paying some attention to. As I said, we're not alone, and we've never been alone. And the history of our race is filled with this kind of thing. Here's another drawing of a rocket-shaped object. They called it a comet. It was seen in 1479. It was seen in Arabia, and it ended up in a German book. But that's a pretty strange comet. Another interesting book from 1506 or 1566, of a series of events that occurred over the city of Nuremberg, where these enormous objects appeared, and there was a big clatter and bang and lots of noise, and everybody in town came out and looked at them. Another one from a German book. They estimated the people who were watching all this happen looked like there was a battle going on between the brown ones or the dark ones and the white ones. And this thing went on for about an hour, and they drew what they saw. No one to this day really knows what the hell it was. Another picture, this is from a fresco of the crucifixion. And this is from a monastery in Yugoslavia. And I call your attention to this little object with the guy sitting inside. Now, what did these painters know, or what were they trying to communicate? Now, this is from another one of Zechariah Sitchin's book, and this is the famous goddess Inanna, one of the great Sumerian goddesses, the lady who became known as Ishtar, the same lady who was known later as Astarte. And this is the way they described her in one of their sketches. Sitchin is convinced that she's wearing her flight gear there. Probably just got out of her little runabout. She's got her goggles on. Again, I'm not certain, but I think it's interesting to consider. Now, this is one of the things that skeptics wish would go away. This is a Renaissance painting by the famous Fra Filippo Lippi, who was a Franciscan friar, who was a great artist during the Renaissance. And this painting he has done is the Madonna and St. John and Jesus. As you know, John and Jesus were related. They were cousins. And here the mother is with the two kids. They were roughly the same age. They were born about the same time. But interestingly enough, a few years ago, some UFO nut like you and I discovered this. What in the world was that? And then they got a magnifying glass and they started looking at it. And here is this object over the Madonna's shoulder. And here is a little gentleman down here with his hand up to his head, covering his eyes, looking up, and a dog is barking. Now the reason I show that to you is that that object and that shape is an absolute, accurate portrayal of an object that was seen in New Guinea a number of years ago in the famous case involving the Reverend Gill at Bonai, New Guinea. An Anglican minister was running a mission school. And one evening about sunset, a couple of the kids came running and yelling about, you know, Reverend, you got to come and look. And they all ran out. And Gill and many of the kids and a number of the teachers stood outside the mission in Bonai, New Guinea for an hour and watched an object that they described as almost identical to that hovering over the beach. And not only that, but they determined after about 15 to 20 minutes that there were guys walking around up there. And the kids were yelling and jumping and waving their arms. And apparently the guys up on this object looked down, saw the kids, and waved back. Well, they described it pretty much like this. And I throw that out simply as one of Ivan Sanderson's ooh parts. It's something to make you think. What was Fra Filippo Lippi trying to communicate? Particularly that kind of an object in that kind of a context. This is the Virgin and St. John and Jesus. I believe so, yeah. And it's hanging in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence.
I thought that burned down.
No,
I
no.
was in the Uffizi, I saw that.
You saw that?
Yeah.
Well, I hope it didn't burn.
I thought that they had a...
I know they had a fire. There was an explosion.
Oh,
A terrorist bomb went off.
that's right.
Yeah, and it damaged a number of statues, but I hope that survived. Because I like to throw that out to skeptics and say, what do you suppose that is? What's this little guy looking at? And why is it in this particular context? And another enigma. Now these are some photographs. I think we're running out of time here. Yeah, we are.
Well, Sean said he'd give you more time because the last guy went late.
Can you give me a little more time? All right, we'll stay as long as we can. These are photographs that were given to me that were taken in Belgium not too many years ago during the famous flap outside of Brussels. Many of you have read about it. This came from SOBEPS, the Belgian UFO research organization. And Patrick Ferrens, who runs SOBEPS, provided these to me. Now these are those massive triangular objects that were spotted flying over Belgium, spotted by police officers, people in the streets. Hundreds of people had spotted these things. And they drew diagrams and they took pictures, but most of the pictures didn't really show a hell of a lot. But they showed the corners. These lights are in corners. This is a big triangle. And this light is in the middle. There's another one. Now, you can't see a lot, but then they took one of the shots to a lab and they did some computer analysis. And there's what they ended up getting. And the eyewitnesses said these objects were 400 to 500 feet across in size. And when they could see them edgewise, to see onto the side of it, it looked like it was 40 to 50 feet thick. And they would hover and stay in one place, then they would dart about, and they would come back, and then they would leave at a high rate of speed. And these things were spotted by hundreds, maybe thousands of people for the course of several months. They were identical to the shape of the objects that were spotted over the Hudson Valley in that famous case where, well, they call it Night Siege, I think, that Hynek was one of the authors.
That forms the most universal form for UFO throughout the world.
Exactly. Well, this is the same kind of a shaped object that has been appearing in Puerto Rico.
That's Belgium, too.
And in Belgium, yeah. And I predict that you're going to be seeing a lot more of these, not only at night, but in the daytime. Because I think it's part of the ongoing training program to get us acclimatized, is that a good word to it? But anyhow, this is the shape of them, and the cops, I think Unsolved Mysteries had a couple of shows on it, and there were a couple of others that were delightful.
You have handouts.
Oh yeah, I do have handouts, okay. I have it, you know, I could ramble on. Anyhow, these are just, these are legitimate pictures of UFOs that I've collected over the years. Based primarily, these are from APRO's files. And APRO was pretty damn good about verifying. Oh, this one is a beauty. This was taken in 1976 in New Zealand. And the doctor who was out on a picnic with his family, they were getting ready to go home. They were wrapping up their dinner and all, and they were getting ready to leave. And this big, beautiful object came drifting slowly over this mountain in New Zealand. New Zealand. And the doctor says it was spinning slowly. And as he was looking up, he said he could have sworn that he saw people in those windows, looking back down at him. And I think one time I had too much bourbon, and I said it was probably the local zoo tour. You know, I could just see somebody somewhere on some planet selling popcorn and peanuts and a couple of soft drinks, and get aboard. We're going to go down and take a look at those crazy earthmen down there. But anyhow, this was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, and the doctor says he and his wife and kids will never ever be the same. Having seen one, I think, what's the old saying? Seeing is believing?
Yes.
There's so many of these I'd love to share with you, but we're probably going to have to wrap it up. This is a picture taken in France. These are not legs. These are light beams. And this is the object, of course. You can see the UFO with the glow around it. Now this picture, I don't know whether it's legit or not, but it appears to be a crashed disc in the Soviet Union with Russian soldiers guarding it. Yeah, but sadly enough, and this is what frosts me a lot, some of the better UFO things are in the Inquirer, including my own story about the lawsuit.
The government loves that, the disinformation.
Oh, don't they though? They love it. This is another picture that I am not certain about, but this is a little more legitimate. The people who got a hold of this photograph tell me that this is legit. This is a Norwegian trawler that is retrieving this object that had crashed in the Norwegian Sea. And this is roughly, they said, about 30 feet in diameter.
What did they do with that one?
Good question. A famous picture taken by a doctor having lunch at a restaurant beside a lake in Argentina. This is interesting because the object flew over the lake, and if it wasn't certain that everybody really saw it, so it turned around and came back and made another pass. And the doctor grabbed his camera and took a picture of it. Now you can see the ionization effect here, and there's the object there. It's a classic disc with a dome on top. But it's another one of those worthwhile pictures. This is a man that I think we all owe a lot to, and this is Don Kehoe, one of the pioneers in this field. He's gone to his rewards, but Don really fought to get the truth out. This is another man that I admire and love a lot. This was Jim McDonald, who was the chairman of the Department of Atmospheric Physics at the University of Arizona a number of years ago. And he really gave the government a bad time. But he went to his reward, and I think it was no accident. And this is Alan Hynek, who we all know died from a fast-acting form of brain cancer. And Alan, at the end of his career, had made a complete 180-degree turn. He was no longer a skeptic. He was totally convinced of the reality of the UFO because he really took the time to take a look at it. So Alan, and these are two of my dear friends who are both gone, Jim and Coral Lorenzen. Coral founded APRO, 40 years ago. And it was one of the most respected and probably the oldest and earliest UFO organization established in the United States. Jim died from a form of fast-acting brain cancer. And when he and Coral were gone, we on the board were simply unable to keep the organization going. As much as we wanted to, we simply couldn't do it because all of us had jobs and careers. Now, this is a famous series of shots taken by Amaury Rivera in Puerto Rico. A lot of people have tried to debunk these pictures. I've spoken to people who were there when the picture was taken and said that's exactly what they saw. Apparently this is a Navy F-14 Tomcat, because right off the coast, well, first of all, there's one of the large naval installations there called Roosevelt Roads. At the time this event occurred, the America, which was an enormous carrier, was anchored about 15 miles off the coast. And the estimates are that these planes came from the America.
Not if it was anchored.
Hmm?
Not if it was anchored. It's got to be underway to launch.
No, they can take aboard craft. With the new technology, they can take them aboard at sea or at anchor. But it may have been moving along, but it was off the coast. The America.
That picture's been proven to be authentic also.
Well, all I can tell you is that a young man by the name of Jim Delatoso in Phoenix, who is quite an expert in analyzing such things, did a complete run-up on it, and he told me, he said, this is legit. Because he compared it with, he did all the pixelations, whatever they call it, and then they did it on the aircraft, and he says they're both real objects.
I got a tape of the guy who was standing, who would sell the whole thing, and it's all been proven out.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
If I can say something interesting, right here in this conference, last couple of days, I've heard, oh, well, you know who analyzed that photo? That was Delatoso, so he's some kind of a con man. Is this just more of the...
Well, let me tell you something about Delatoso. If he's a real phony, why does NASA have him under contract?
Yeah, good question.
That's the tricky disinformation they're feeding.
Yeah, well,
us.
this is it. You know, it's like,
just-
oh, well, I've heard
Yeah, you
that's
gotta-
proven to be a hoax. I said, well, what about all the people that saw it?
Listen, guys, if we had more time, I could talk to you about some disinformation that would just
Right.
literally curl your hair. The better stories get most of the disinformation. A really good story gets more attention from the government than you can imagine. But anyhow, Delatoso did a run-up on it, and I've concluded that it's probably true.
About 3 minutes.
Okay.
They're going to have Q&A?
Hopefully, maybe a couple. And look again. Look at this object. Remember the painting from 1710? And the one I photographed that had the lights on the rim? Now, this thing is a hell of a lot larger. This thing probably is 60 to 80 feet in diameter, based upon the size of the Tomcat.
That doesn't look like it was 5 miles from the camera, wasn't that one of the estimates from the analysis?
I hadn't really read that, how far it was. That Tomcat's not that far. That's only about 3 miles, or maybe at the most, maybe 2.
Yeah.
Anyhow, this is another picture of an object, and those are not legs, those are light beams. And the visitors, guys, can do some incredible things with light. They can heal wounds, they can stun you, they can put you to sleep. Now, this is sad. This is a piece of what was left of apparently one of the aliens from a crash in Europe a number of years ago. This was given to me by a friend, an ex-cop in northern Yorkshire in England by the name of Tony Dodd. And it's the hand of one of the guys, and you notice that there are 5 fingers and no thumb. Then they turned it over, took another picture.
You still have that?
I don't have the object, but they have it. Yeah, they have the object.
About 1 minute.
Okay. Now, we're getting close to this first sequence. Good. You may remember a number of years ago an event occurred, supposedly, at a place called Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. The estimate year is of roughly 1972. This event involved a couple of large UFOs coming in, apparently expected, landing on the runway, parking. Strange characters got out and spent an hour and a half talking to the base commander, the operations officer, the security officer. The entire event was filmed. A number of years ago, if you've read any of Linda Howe's work, and Jamie Chandra, and a few others, they were planning to release this information to the public. They were going to release the film of the guys getting out of the ship, walking into the hangar, talking to the base commander. They apparently changed their mind and said, no, not yet. But they did let an artist watch the film, and he sketched, can you focus that just a little bit better? He sketched what he saw in the film, and these are supposed to be the guys who got out. That's I guess, is about as good as we can get. These were some of the crew members here, and this apparently was the boss. And I simply wanted to bring this to your attention in closing because I throw it out as a stimulating possibility. Notice the nose, the eye, the ear, the chin. Now this is supposed to be a relatively accurate portrayal by an artist of what he saw in the film. This is a statue. This picture was given to me by Michael Hesseman. This is an ancient Sumerian statue in the Berlin Museum of one of the great Sumerian lady goddesses. This is supposed to be the Lady Ishtar when she was older. Look at the nose, the eyes, the chin, and the ears. Now, look at her hair. Go back to this other one just briefly, and look. Is that hair, or is that some kind of a headpiece? Well, we're not sure. But look at that nose, the chin, and the eyes, and the ear. And look at the Lady Ishtar in old age.
That's very remarkable,
And I, you know, being a student of history, I thought that was just too good to pass up. And then I must conclude by showing you the one photograph that I have. Yeah, look at that. Well, many of the gods were supposed to have big eyes. Many of the little dudes that are wandering around abducting people have big eyes. But I have one photograph that I'll conclude with, which I believe is one of the few legitimate pictures of one of our visitors. There have been all kinds of shots taken, there are all kinds of claims made, but this one, of all the ones that I have seen, we've studied, researched, I checked it out, taken in Japan a few years ago along the side of a road, and I want to call your attention to the nose, the eyes, what appears to be, well, not much of a chin, but look at the neck piece here, and the suit. But that nose and those eyes, it rung a bell with me on the statue in the Berlin Museum and the statue of the guys that got out of the ships at Holloman Air Force Base. And I simply throw it out to you as a possibility. It's worth thinking about. You can open your mind to the infinite possibilities of what we're dealing with. I think it's fun to do that sometimes. Now, if I could have some lights. That was a communications device.
Oh. And the leader was carrying it, or they all?
Apparently, no, only the leader had it. And that apparently he spoke into it, and they heard English.
Like an instant translation.
Yeah. And apparently this event was not telepathic, as so many of them are. He'd speak into this like I'm using this mic, and you could hear him. And then apparently he understood English enough. But the event apparently did occur. There's been too much evidence coming out over the years about it, and it was not the only event of its kind. It's happened many times. So much so that I can tell you honestly in my own personal belief that our government, our military, has been involved intimately with at least one advanced intelligence for at least 30 years. Now, who they are and what the involvement is and what they're doing together, I don't know. But there is information to indicate that they've given us some technology. We have reverse engineered some technology from some of the crash retrievals. Apparently they have shared information of some kind. And that is the thing that really pisses me the most, is that you being denied that kind of information by your government because they've determined, first of all, you're not mature enough to deal with that. And ladies and gentlemen, forgive my infantry speak. That's pure crap. And they're going to get away with it as long as you let them get away with it. And you've got to stop. What? Oh.
Are you going to review?
Yeah, I brought some handouts. I wanted to share a few things with you. I have been convinced, and I am convinced, beyond a doubt, that every major religion on this planet has its origin in extraterrestrial information. The information, the theological philosophy, the great teachers, whether they're Buddha, Krishna, Jesus, Muhammad, the material is all the same. And if you study it with an open and honest mind, you go through the Quran. It's beautiful. It's an honest, decent book, and I advise you and encourage you to read it if you get a chance. The Bhagavad Gita, the holy book of the Hindus. It's based upon their whole theology. Here is the teachings of the compassionate Buddha from the Buddhist sutras. And then, of course, we're all familiar with this one. In this book is involved the two great books of two of the world's greatest religions, Judaism and Christianity. The Old Testament, the Torah, at least the first 5 books, the New Testament, which is the basic teachings of Christ. I bring these and share them with you and tell you that I've gone through them in detail over the years, and there are passages in the Bhagavad Gita that are identical to passages in the New Testament, which leads me to suspect that the one we know of as the carpenter from Galilee either read the Bhagavad Gita, which existed 2,000 years before he was born, or he wrote it, because the comparisons are too similar. And what I want to close with, and this is the best thing I can think of to share with you as we bring this to a close. This UFO matter has been affecting us over the years as a triggering mechanism. I put it in the same category as the crop circles. It's a form of a communication. It's a form of a message. It's a way of trying to get our attention and say, damn it, wake up. Not only are you not alone, you've never been alone, and it's about time you start paying attention. Now, we're approaching the end of a decade. We're approaching the end of a century. And we're approaching the end of a millennium. And beyond that, we're approaching the end of an age, the Piscean Age. The new century is going to bring about changes that are going to be literally earth-shaking in their ramifications and implications. And this is simply one person's view, but I'm throwing it out for whatever it's worth. A door is being opened for us, literally, out there, to finally grow up and mature and to come out there and take our place, our rightful place, in that infinite community of life. And let me tell you something. If we take that invitation up and we decide we want to go out there, we're going to have to go through that door as one people, one race, with one philosophy from one little planet, or we may not go at all. And this garbage and crap and bullshit that's going on in Bosnia, in the left bank, and going on in Rwanda, oh my God, it's going on all over the world. We are not going to make it, guys, unless we go through together as one people from one planet with one future. And we're not going to make it if we don't do that. And we've got to do that. And that's why I say to you, wake up, pay attention, do your own research, do your own homework, and God bless you all. And it's been a pleasure, and thank you. Handouts I brought, a couple from Zechariah Sitchin's work, a couple from, I think, what, the Tao of Physics?
Yes.
And then again, I threw this out.
You've got your set up there.
Oh, have I said? Okay. There's something that's always been a kind of a favorite little thing of mine. I'd like to have everybody pick up a set of this stuff. But I want you to take this with you. Many of you know of it. Many of you have read it. And I have a copy of this enlarged and framed in my house. And it is really the best guide I can think of for living your life. Take it with you with my love, and I hope to see all of you guys again. Yeah.
In your operations with the military there in France, have you ever come across any knowledge that you can pass on to us that would indicate what happened in the German bunkers? We all know that Nazi Germany was working on flying discs, and the Nazis had developed some of that technology. As far as NATO was concerned, were they trying to back engineer the Nazi technology, the Han Solar electromagnetic surface foil aircraft that were found in the bunkers in Germany?
You remember Operation Paperclip?
Yes.
Okay, you know that was that program where we literally busted everything wide open to get into Germany and get some of their scientists and the technology and some of the hardware out before the Russians got it.
Right.
Well, we got some of it. We didn't get all of it. And in that technology was flying disc technology. The Germans were indeed experimenting with it and apparently had some operating systems. God only knows, can you imagine what would have happened if they had gotten those systems online and developed the atomic bomb, which they were very close to.
Right.
The war would have had a different ending. Now, there's rumors and stories that you all may have heard about, that some of the aliens had been working with the Germans, giving them a little help, a little push here and there. And then when it became apparent to them that some of Hitler's racial policies were so alien to the aliens that they couldn't accept it anymore, they withdrew their support and just backed the hell off and let him fall as he did. I don't know whether there's any truth to that or not. I do know that I have seen the diagrams, the plans from the books, and damn it, they did have flying models in 1943 that looked very much like the same thing Townsend Brown had in this country in 1946. So we have our own disk technology. We have our own anti-grav system. Now, whether any of you know it or not, your government developed a sustained, controlled fusion reaction at Los Alamos over 10 years ago. Now, I don't know how long you're planning to wait to hear that news, but it happened. Now, with the oil companies and the automobile industry and the steel industry and all the rest of it, you won't know that for a long time.
What do they call that?
What, fusion? Controlled fusion?
For that system. Cold fusion? No. Tokamak? Yeah.
Tokamak, yeah, it's a
Oh, the tokamak, yeah. I'm not sure that's the one, the way they did it, but they did it with lasers. And I think the tokamak is a...
False anode?
Huh?
Created a false anode?
I don't know. I'm not that much of a scientist. I've talked to some guys who were there and said, damn it, we did it. It's the greatest news in modern history. Do you realize what it's going to mean to the human race? Well, it might if we ever find out about it. But because of the economy and because that everything is so tightly controlled back there by just a few guys, and if you want to know what a rotten rat's nest that is, talk to Gary Schultz sometime. That young man has really done some homework. Boy, we got a problem, guys, and we're going to have to solve it. We're going to have to make Bill Clinton and the rest of those yo-yos back there, and forgive me if I'm offending anybody's sensitivity, that's too bad. We're going to have to make them, damn it, read the Constitution and pay attention, and damn it, give us our rights back. Or you might as well flush them down the toilet. Now, forgive me for getting a little heated there.
You showed or talked about the situation in Holland where the aliens were in there. So they're apparently playing into the military's hand as far as communicating with the military secretly. Why do you think that?
Yeah, to some degree that's probably been the case. First of all, when they started to decide that they wanted to open up lines of communication, what a disappointment it must have been to them when they said, now who can we talk to down there? There's no such thing as a world government. There's no such thing as an agency that represents the entire race. So we're apparently going to have to talk to certain ones of the big, powerful, most important, larger governments. Well, I think that's what they did. And the rumors that I've heard and the evidence that's led me to believe that the famous Eisenhower meeting probably did take place, that they did meet with Ike. And Ike said, after he got up off the floor, shocked and overwhelmed with the reality of it, he said, "Give us a few years. Let us try to get the people prepared for this," which is apparently going on. But there's a young contractor in Las Vegas by the name of Robert Bigelow, who many of you may know has been funding out of his own pocket many of the research programs back in MIT. He's been funding John Mack and Carpenter and Bud Hopkins, holding these big conferences at the universities. I had a nice chat with Bigelow one time a couple of years ago, and I kept yelling and complaining about the fact that the government isn't moving fast enough, that everybody seems to have their own damned agenda. And Bigelow is my guest at dinner, and he's worth about 20 million bucks, but I invited him. He smiled and he says, "Let me tell you something." He says, "Everybody has an agenda, but there's only one agenda, and it's theirs. And they're on it, they've been following it, and they're going to follow it. And the rumor I heard recently is they have told our government and most of the Western major governments, guys, your time is running out. You better get your people prepared and do it now, because you don't have that much more time." And so what do you do? What do you see? You end up things like Roswell coming out, which is the first of approximately 25 or 28 separate UFO stories that are be coming out in the next 14 months, which is part of this program. I believe they call it inculcation. That we're going to have to pay attention and get ready for this. Yes, Gary?
Very quickly, Bob, on the note of the Nazis and saucer technology and so on, I've heard, and can you verify that a saucer crashed at Peenemünde and therefore they had access to it, reverse engineered and so on? Is there any
That the Germans reverse engineered it?
the crash at Peenemünde?
That's a possibility. As you know, the Germans did have, and still do have, probably one of the finest engineering capabilities in the world. German technology is really top rate. Well, I'm not at all surprised if that did indeed occur. But the crash at Roswell and a couple of other crashes like at Kingman and a couple of other places, so many people, and I am one of them included, I'm convinced that that was not an accidental crash. The guys who were on the scene said it was almost like they've given it to us. Because in the Kingman case, one of the little dudes didn't die. He lived a year, or at least almost a year. They didn't know what to feed him, they didn't know how to keep him going, but he lived a year, and they were scared to death out there at where is it? Nellis was where it was at the time. They thought that they were going to come back for him. Well, they didn't come back for him. If he was indeed a clone, one of those biological laboratory products, they simply wrote him off. And as Jay Leno says about the potato chips, they went back and made some more. And I think that's exactly what happened. Many of the little dudes are not a life form as we know it, but some of the taller grays are. They're separate species. Yes?
What do you feel about the rumors of a hoax or a plot to deceive the people of the world with the second coming of Christ through...
Deception in 95 coming up, the fall of 95.
I mean, I hate to even bring it up. I don't like to ask that, but I mean, there's such a division in the UFO community about don't trust the first aliens we see, and yet they really don't have, you know...
Well, it's a damn good question, and I know where you're coming from on it. And all I can do is tell you my personal view. And this is important that you understand that this is strictly my view. That we have been a part of an ongoing, developing program for several thousands of years. That the shape study did hit that on the head. And that the program is on schedule, and the controllers, the guys who designed it and put it into effect, are still in charge. And this is a personal view, but I believe the one we know of as the carpenter from Galilee is indeed going to show up again. But it's not going to be quite like many of my fundamentalist friends believe. Now, you know the fundamentalists all have these ideas of the rapture and one thing or another. Well, the second coming is going to occur, but it ain't going to be nothing like what they expect. All hell is going to break loose, and it's going to be involving, in my opinion, a massive, overt, alien contact to the entire planet. And I have every expectation in the world that the one we know of as the carpenter from Galilee is going to be there again. So the Christian fundamentalists are right, but it's not quite the same way they think.
And they'll probably try to make that seem like the evil, the Antichrist.
Well, that's one of the reasons why the entire planet is in for pure hell for a while. Now, I tell you this honestly, the planet is going to go through some real hell. Not only will there be cataclysmic earth changes, but this reality, this event, this series of things that are going to be occurring are literally going to bring the world you know to an end. The old planet is not going to explode, but the way of life that you and everyone else on this planet has known for thousands of years literally is going to end. And you talk about a paradigm shift, a new worldview. Let me tell you, only a few of you guys, those of you who are opening your minds to these possibilities, those of you who are doing your own research, who are beginning to look at it and say, hey, this is real. You're the ones that are probably going to survive it. The rest of them will probably be blithering idiots, because people are, there's a psychological term called denial. That when you're confronted with something that is absolutely so distasteful to you that you cannot emotionally deal with, that you simply wipe it off. It's denial. It didn't happen. It doesn't happen. A lot of the UFO skeptics are in denial. They simply refuse to look at the evidence. Well, when the things begin to unravel in the next few short years, and I think you're going to see some of it before the end of '94, but '95 is going to be jam-packed. And I say to you in closing, and you have to forgive me because I'm just about running out of steam here, I want to quote Tolstoy, as I did briefly the other day. All of the years I've been involved in this research have led me to one overwhelming conclusion, that we, you, I, and all of us are immortal beings, that we are not what you see sitting in these chairs. We are an immortal life form, whatever it's made up of, electromagnetic energy. We are a living being that literally is immortal. And I've been convinced of the reality of reincarnation for so many years that there's no more question in my mind about it. But let me tell you this. Your being here is no accident. Your being on this planet at this time is no accident. It's not a matter of chance. It's all a part of something. You probably chose to come here. You probably agreed to play a role. You probably volunteered to be a part of this incredible series of events that are taking place. And guys, you bought a front row seat. So don't, again, I am getting into some old infantry terminology. Stop pissing and moaning and get on with it and enjoy it. Because you got a front row seat at an event that the entire universe is watching. Because this planet is about to make that jump. And all of the people on it are about to make that jump. And what that jump involves, I don't know. But I know that it's going to change things in ways that we can't even imagine. It's going to be a transformation. And to use a religious term, it will literally probably become a transfiguration. But that's all right. And even the heartbreak and the blood and all of the mess, that's all right. As Tolstoy said, there is something within the human spirit that will prevail and endure no matter how dark the world becomes. And I'd like to leave you with that thought, and I'll tell you God bless you all, and thank you for coming.